My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 22 years old. 2 weeks ago, I stood on a graduation stage in front of 3,000 people while my parents, the same two people who once told me I wasn't worth the investment, sat in the front row with their faces drained of all color. They weren't there for me. They were there for my twin brother. Ethan had always been the headline, the natural leader, the one who commanded a room. When my parents bought the front row seats for Whitmore University's commencement ceremony, they thought they were securing the best view of his moment. They had no idea I was even enrolled. They definitely didn't know I'd be the one delivering the keynote address. The stadium was already buzzing when I took my seat in the honors section near the stage. 3,000 folding chairs stretched across the field. Banners snapped in the May wind. Families waved programs like fans under the bright sun. And there they were, my father in his navy suit. Camera, lens, extended, angled toward the graduate section where Ethan was laughing with his friends. My mother sat beside him, clutching a bouquet of white roses, scanning the crowd for her golden son. They looked proud, certain, secure. They had no idea. The university president stepped up to the podium. And now, she announced, "It is my honor to introduce this year's valedictorian and Whitfield scholar." I felt my pulse steady instead of spike. 3,000 people leaned forward in welcoming Adrian Cole. For a second, my parents didn't move. Then I stood, and from 20 feet away, I watched my father lower his camera, not because he chose to, because his hands stopped working. This story didn't start on that stage. It started 4 years earlier, in our living room, when my father looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't worth betting on. Before I take you back to that night, I want to pause for a second. If you've ever been compared to a sibling and quietly found yourself losing every time, type same in the comments. I read them. I mean that. And if stories about family, ambition, and proving people wrong hit home for you, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you think. Now let me take you back to the summer of 2021. The night my father turned my future into a balance sheet. The acceptance letters arrived on the same Tuesday afternoon in April, 2 thick envelopes. Same address, same last name, same DNA, different futures. Ethan got into Whitmore University, private, prestigious, $65,000 a year. The kind of school that prints success into your resume before you've earned it. I got into Eastbrook State. Solid, respected, $25,000 a year. Not glamorous, but real. That night, Dad called what he liked to refer to as a family strategy meeting. We sat in the living room. He took his usual seat in the leather armchair, the throne. Really legs crossed, hands steepled like he was about to present quarterly earnings. Mom sat on the edge of the couch. Ethan leaned casually against the mantel, already smiling. I sat across from Dad with my acceptance letter folded in half. "Let's talk numbers," Dad began. He didn't ask how we felt, didn't ask what we wanted, just numbers. "Whitmore is an investment," he said. "Connections, leadership pipelines, alumni networks that actually matter." He looked at Ethan. "You thrive in those environments." Then, he turned to me. "Eastbrook is fine. Affordable. Practical." Something in his tone shifted, not cruel, just clinical. "We'll be covering Ethan's tuition in full. Room, board, everything." Ethan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Mom smiled softly at him. Then Dad looked back at me. "We're not funding your education." The sentence didn't register at first. "I'm sorry," I asked. He didn't flinch. "You're intelligent, Adrian. Nobody's denying that. But you don't command attention. You don't network. You don't push forward." He paused, like he was choosing words carefully. "There's no clear return on investment." It felt like being audited as a human being. I glanced at Mom. She was staring at her hands. I looked at Ethan. He wasn't gloating. He just looked relieved it wasn't him. "You'll figure it out." Dad continued. "You're disciplined, resourceful. That's your strength." Strength? Like I was being assigned a consolation prize. "So, I just pay for it myself?" I asked. He shrugged. "Take loans. Work. Plenty of people do it." Ethan cleared his throat. "Dad, it's not personal," Dad said, cutting him off. "It's strategic." Strategic. That word lodged somewhere deep in my chest. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't been able to articulate for years. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the mistake. I was the low-yield asset. Ethan was the growth stock, and my father was reallocating capital. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed in complete silence. Because something had just shifted. Not in them, in me. 4 years later, in front of 3,000 people, my father would finally understand what he'd miscalculated. But that realization didn't start with revenge. It started with a search bar and a cracked laptop screen. The college decision wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time my father said it out loud. The favoritism had always been there, subtle enough to deny, obvious enough to scar. When we turned 16, Ethan walked into the driveway and found a brand new Honda Civic with a red bow stretched across the hood. Dad handed him the keys like he was knighting him. For leadership activities, he said, "You'll need to drive yourself." I got Ethan's old laptop. The battery lasted 40 minutes. The screen had a crack running diagonally through the corner like a fault line. "We can't afford 2 cars," Mom told me gently, "but we could afford Ethan's ski trips, his senior year Europe tour, his summer leadership program in Barcelona. Every Christmas, Ethan's gifts were wrapped in thick paper with ribbons. Mine were practical: socks, a desk lamp, 1 year, a budgeting planner. Family vacations were the clearest. Ethan always had his own hotel room. Networking, Dad would say. He needs space to make calls. I slept on pull-out couches. Once, in a resort hallway on what the brochure called a convertible lounge space. It was a closet with a fold-down bed. In every family photo, Ethan stood in the center. I stood slightly to the side, sometimes cropped at the shoulder. Once, entirely out of frame, I noticed they pretended I didn't. When I was 17, I finally asked Mom about it. "Why does it always feel like he matters more?" She sighed like I'd asked something unreasonable. "That's in your head, Audrey-Ann. We love you both the same. But love doesn't hide in spreadsheets." A few months before the college meeting, I found Mom's phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping. It was just there. A text thread with Aunt Claire. I shouldn't have read it. I did. "Harold thinks Ethan has real executive potential." Mom had written, "Adrian is steady, but he doesn't stand out. We have to be realistic about where we put our resources." Resources. I put the phone down carefully, walked out of the kitchen, closed my bedroom door. That night, I didn't feel angry. Anger would have meant I expected something different. Instead, I felt clarity. If I wasn't the priority, then I was free from the obligation to compete. I sat at my desk, opened the cracked laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor in the search bar. For years, I'd been trying to earn their attention, trying to outwork, outscore, outachieve my brother. That night, I stopped trying to beat Ethan and started trying to build something that didn't require my father's approval. I typed full scholarships for independent students. The results loaded slowly. The Wi-Fi flickered twice. The laptop battery warning blinked red. I waited, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for validation. I was looking for leverage. And somewhere in those search results was the first crack in the system my father thought he controlled. At Deutschsprache. I sat on my bedroom floor with a spiral notebook, a calculator, and the kind of focus that only comes from realizing no one is coming to save you. Eastbrook State $25. 000 per year. 4 years $100. Ling ling ling. Parent contribution $0. My savings from summer jobs landscaping. Warehouse shifts. Tutoring algebra totaled twin. Semi-Sisher. The gap wasn't intimidating. It was suffocating. I wrote out my options. Option 1. Don't go. Option 2. Take out 6 figures in loans and spend the next 20 years repaying a decision I didn't make. Option 3. Stretch 4 years into 7. Work full-time. Crawl to the finish line. Every scenario ended the same way, proving my father right. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then I flipped to a fresh page. If I couldn't rely on family capital, I would manufacture my own. I started digging. Scholarship databases, merit awards, financial need grants, essay contests. Some were outdated. Some were scams. Most required GPA thresholds, recommendation letters, proof of independence. I bookmarked everything. Then I found Eastbrook's internal merit program, 5 students per year. Full tuition. Small living stipend. Highly competitive. 5. I circled it twice. And then, buried in a National Foundation directory, I saw another name. The Hawthorne Fellowship. Full ride. 10,000. 000. Annual stipend. 20 recipients nationwide. Partnership schools included several private institutions. I leaned back and laughed once. 20 in the entire country. It sounded like something meant for people raised to believe they belonged in rooms like that. Still, I bookmarked it. Because here's what I understood that night. If the competition is brutal, fewer people apply who believe they're worthy. And I had nothing left to lose. I mapped out income streams next. Job 1 Campus Cafe. 500 M. To Auto 00 M. Job 2 Residence Hall Cleaning Crew. Weekends. Job 3 Tutoring Freshman Economics if I could qualify. Projected monthly income $1. $401. Lubai. Barely enough. I found the cheapest housing listing near campus, a 4-bedroom rental with peeling paint and no air conditioning. $320 a month. Shared bathroom. No parking. I wrote out a schedule that looked like something designed by someone who didn't sleep. 500 M. Cafe 900 M. Штiri Nich Pora. M. Class 600 P. M. Deset Nich Prast. M. A. Tutoring. Sleep 4-5 hours. For 4 years. It wasn't sustainable. It was necessary. The week before I left for Eastbrook, Ethan posted photos from his Cancun trip with friends' beach sunsets. Linen shirts. Rooftop dinners. I was packing a thrift store comforter into a used suitcase with a broken zipper. Our lives had already diverged. But every night before I fell asleep that summer, I repeated the same sentence in my head. This is the price of independence. Not revenge. Not pride. Freedom. And somewhere on Eastbrook's campus, though I didn't know it yet, there was a professor who would see what my own father never did. Freshman year started at 400 a.m. Every day. My alarm wasn't a sound. It was a vibration against cheap plywood. I'd sit up before it stopped, swing my feet onto a cold floor, and tell myself the same thing move. By pinch 0 a.m., I was behind the counter at the campus cafe. Apron tied. Hands already smelling like burnt espresso. The regulars didn't know my name. I was hey, man, or black coffee. No sugar. By Jivinch 0 a.m., I was in lectures. By Sheisht 0 p.m., I was in the library. By midnight, I was still there. 4 hours of sleep became normal. 5 felt luxurious. I stopped noticing exhaustion. It just folded into me like another layer of skin. While other freshmen built friend groups, I built spreadsheets. While they memorized frat chants, I memorized economic models. I didn't resent them. I just didn't have the luxury of participation. Thanksgiving freshman year was the first real test. I couldn't afford a flight home. Even if I could, I wasn't sure I would have gone. I called anyway. Mom answered on the second ring. There was noise behind her laughter. Clinking dishes. Happy Thanksgiving, I said. Oh, Adrian. Happy Thanksgiving. Honey. A word that felt rehearsed. Is Dad there? I asked. A pause. Then I heard his voice in the background. Not muted enough. Tell him I'm busy. Mom's tone shifted instantly. Your father's in the middle of carving the turkey. Of course he was. I won't keep you. I said. Just wanted to check in. Are you eating enough? I looked at the cup of instant ramen on my desk. Yeah. After we hung up, I made the mistake of opening social media. Ethan had just posted a photo. Right? The 3 of them at the dining table. Candles lit. Wine glasses raised. Perfect symmetry. 3 place settings. Not 4. They hadn't even set a plate for me. That was the moment something inside me changed. Up until then, the grind had been fueled by something emotional, a need to prove, to earn, to maybe one day be acknowledged. That night, the ache went quiet. Not gone, just hollowed out. And in its place came clarity. I stopped imagining the day they'd realize they were wrong. I started imagining the day I wouldn't care whether they did. Sophomore year blurred into repetition. Coffee shop. Lectures. Library. Repeat. I fainted once behind the counter mid-shift. Dehydration? The campus clinic said. Lack of sleep. I was back at work the next morning. Another time, I sat in my car technically, my roommate's car he'd lent me for a tutoring job and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing hard, feeling everything press in at once. Then I wiped my face, adjusted the mirror, and drove home. By the end of sophomore year, my GPA was a 4. Ling, 6 straight semesters. Not because I was naturally brilliant, because failure wasn't an option. Junior year, something shifted again. Not in me, in how people looked at me. Professors started remembering my name, inviting me to office hours, asking about research interests. I didn't walk taller. I just nodded and took notes. But internally, something was stabilizing. The narrative my father had written about me steady. Unremarkable. Low yield began to fracture. Not loudly, quietly. One exam at a time. One paper at a time. One sunrise shift at a time. I missed birthdays. Missed holidays. Missed every single family gathering except the ones I saw online after the fact. Ethan thrived at Whitmore. Internship photos. Leadership retreats. Smiling alumni mixers. We rarely spoke. When we did, it was surface level. How's school good? You busy? Neither of us mentioned the comparison that hung between us like static. By junior year, I realized something else. The grind wasn't making me bitter. It was making me disciplined. There's a difference. Bitterness looks backward. Discipline looks forward. And somewhere between 400 a.m. alarms and midnight study sessions, I stopped feeling like the overlooked twin. I started feeling like someone building his own infrastructure, still invisible to my family, but no longer invisible to myself. And that's when Professor Daniel Hart walked into my life and saw something my father never bothered to look for. Professor Daniel Hart had a reputation at Eastbrook. Brilliant, demanding, unimpressed. He'd published in every major economics journal worth mentioning. Students said he hadn't given an A in years, that he believed great inflation was moral decay. I sat in the third row of his advanced microeconomics class and kept my head down. The first paper he assigned was brutal 20 pages analyzing market inefficiencies under asymmetric information. Most students complained before they even started. I didn't. I treated it like everything else. Wake up. Execute. Improve. When the papers were returned, mine had 2 letters written at the top in thick blue ink. A+. Below it, see me after class. My stomach dropped. After the lecture ended, I approached his desk. He didn't smile. Adrienne Cole, he said, flipping through my paper. Where did you learn to write like this? I didn't. I answered. I just revised it a lot. He looked at me over his glasses. Studying, assessing. You're working how many hours a week? 35. Sometimes 40. And still carrying a full course load. Yes. Esther. Oh, he leaned back slightly. Why? It wasn't curiosity. It was evaluation. My parents aren't funding my education. I said. So I fund it. He didn't react outwardly, but something sharpened in his expression. You plan to stay at Eastbrook all 4 years. That's the plan. Why? Because it's what I can afford. He tapped a finger against my paper. You're underutilized here. That word again. Utilized. You've heard of the Hawthorne Fellowship, he asked. I nodded slowly. Everyone has. 20 students nationwide. And you think that makes it unattainable. It makes it statistically unlikely. He didn't smile. Statistics don't intimidate disciplined people. He closed the folder. I'm nominating you. The words hit harder than I expected. For the Hawthorne, he clarified. Full ride. Partner institutions. Public speaking obligations. The fellow delivers commencement remarks. I blinked once. That's for students who stand out. You do, he said plainly. You just don't advertise it. Silence stretched between us. Then, he leaned forward. Adrienne. Potential means nothing if no one sees it. Let me help you be seen. For the first time since that night in my father's living room, someone wasn't measuring me against my brother. They were measuring me against what I could become. And that changed everything. The application process took 3 months. 10 essays. 3 recommendation letters. 2 faculty interviews. 1 recorded leadership statement. I treated it like another job. Wake up. Execute. Improve. Professor Hart reviewed every draft with surgical precision. Cut the self-pity, he'd say. Replace it with ownership. So I did. By the time the final round email arrived, I was too exhausted to feel hopeful. Subject Hawthorne Fellowship Finalist Notification. Out of 214 applicants, I had been selected as one of 50 finalists. Final interview in person. New York City. I checked my bank account. 900美元. A last-minute flight would cost half of that. A hotel would swallow the rest. Rent was due in 12 days. For a moment, I considered declining. Statistically unlikely. Then my phone buzzed again, this time a knock at my door. It was Ryan, my roommate. "You look like someone died," he said. I showed him the screen. He read it once. Then again. "You're going," he said. "I can't afford bus ticket. $50? Overnight ride. I'll spot you the rest." "I'm not borrowing." "You're not borrowing." He cut in. "You're accepting temporary capital injection." I stared at him. He grinned. "See, I've learned from you." So I took the bus. 8 hours overnight. No sleep. Arrived in Manhattan at 5:12 a.m. with a stiff neck, a thrift store blazer, and coffee that tasted like regret. The Hawthorne headquarters lobby was all glass and marble. Other finalists sat with their parents. Designer suites. Polished confidence. I sat alone, hands steady, heart quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel inferior. I felt prepared. The panel interview lasted 40 minutes. They asked about resilience, leadership, long-term vision. One board member leaned forward and asked, "Why should we invest in you?" 4 years ago, that question would have gutted me. Now it sharpened me. Because I don't waste opportunity. I said, "I build infrastructure. I don't rely on momentum. I manufacture it." They nodded. 2 weeks later, I was walking to the cafe when my phone buzzed again. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, opened the email. "Dear Mr. Cole, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a Hawthorne Fellow for the class of 2025. I read it 3 times, then a fourth. The words didn't blur. They solidified. Full tuition. 10美元. 000 annual living stipend. Transfer eligibility to partner institutions. And the fellow would deliver the commencement address. I sat down on the curb. Didn't cry. Just exhaled long and slow like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years. People walked past me. Cars moved. The world continued. But something inside me locked into place. I wasn't the low-yield asset. I wasn't the backup plan. I was the 120 out of 214. That night, Professor Hart called me personally. "Congratulations, Adrian." "Thank you. There's something else," he added. "One of the Hawthorne partner schools is Whitmore University." "Whitmore. Ethan's school. If you transfer," he continued, "you'll graduate under their honors designation and as Hawthorne Fellow. You'll deliver the keynote." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I said. "I know," he replied. "You're doing it because Whitmore's finance program is stronger." He paused. "But if someone in the audience learns they miscalculated?" "That's incidental." I made the decision that night, and I didn't tell my family. Not a word. I transferred to Whitmore at the start of senior year. No announcement. No group message. No update to extended family. Just paperwork, relocation, and silence. Whitmore felt different from Eastbrook the moment I stepped on campus. Cleaner lines, older buildings, the kind of quiet confidence that comes from inherited prestige. Students walked like they belonged there. I walked like I had work to do. The Hawthorne stipend covered housing, but I still chose a modest apartment off campus. I wasn't there for the experience. I was there for the program, advanced financial modeling, institutional strategy, executive policy seminars. 3 weeks in, it happened. I was on the 3rd floor of the main library, buried in a case study on sovereign debt restructuring, when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in months. "Adrian." I looked up. Ethan stood 10 feet away, holding a coffee and staring at me like I'd stepped out of a hallucination. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Studying," I said calmly. "No, I mean here. I transferred." He blinked. "Transferred to Whitmore?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Start of the semester." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Not hostile. Just trying to process." "Mom and Dad didn't say anything." "They don't know." Silence. "What do you mean they don't know?" "Exactly that." He set his coffee down slowly. "How are you paying for this?" he asked. "Scholarship." "What scholarship?" "Hawthorne." The word landed. I watched recognition flicker across his face. Whitmore students knew that name. Wait, he said. That's the national one. The keynote thing. I didn't answer. His posture shifted. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Something closer to unsettled. Why didn't you tell anyone, he asked. I closed my textbook. Did you ever ask how I was paying for Eastbrook? He opened his mouth. Stopped. That silence said more than an apology would have. He stepped closer. Do you hate us? It was almost the same question I'd asked myself freshman year. No, I said evenly. You can't hate people you've stopped expecting anything from. That hit harder than anger. He ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. It's just information. I replied. He stared at me for another second, then said quietly, Dad's going to lose it. Probably. And you're just okay with that. I'm not managing his emotions anymore. That was new for me. I gathered my books. I've got class. I said, Adrian, I paused. Congratulations. He added awkwardly, if it's what I think it is. Thanks. That night, my phone lit up for the first time in almost a year. Mom, Dad, Ethan again. I silenced them all. Whatever was coming would happen on my timeline, not theirs. And in a few months, when Whitmore filled a stadium with 3,000 people, they would find out exactly what that scholarship meant. All at once, with nowhere to look but forward, graduation morning arrived with surgical precision. May 17th. Clear sky. No clouds. The kind of weather universities pray for. In brochures. Whitmore's stadium seated 3,000. By usam chajasti a.m. It was nearly full, families pouring through the gates. Flowers wrapped in cellophane. Balloons drifting above rows of folding chairs. The low hum of anticipation carried across the field. I entered through the faculty corridor. Black gown. Standard. Gold honors sash across my shoulders. And pinned at my chest, the Hawthorne medallion bronze. Understated. Impossible to miss. I took my seat in the front honors section near the stage. 20 feet behind me, Ethan stood with the general graduate group, laughing with friends, adjusting his cap. And in the front row of the audience dead center sat my parents. Dad wore his Navy suit, the one reserved for important optics, his camera lens extended, angled precisely toward Ethan's row. Mom held a bouquet of white roses. She kept checking the program schedule, likely tracking when Ethan's name would be called. Between them sat an empty chair, probably for bags. Not for me. They hadn't noticed. The ceremony began in waves: welcome address, honorary recognitions, departmental acknowledgments. Applause rose and fell like tides. I kept my hands folded. My pulse didn't race. It steadied. Then the university president stepped back to the podium. And now, she said, it is my honor to introduce this year's Valedictorian and Hawthorne Fellow, a student who has demonstrated exceptional resilience, academic distinction, and leadership. Dad adjusted his camera again. I could almost predict the angle. Please join me in welcoming Adrian Cole. For half a second, nothing moved. Then I stood. 3,000 heads turned. My footsteps echoed against the stage floor as I walked toward the podium. And from 20 feet away, I watched my father's hands freeze. The camera lowered. Not deliberately. Mechanically. My mother's bouquet tilted sideways. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then something close to disbelief. Ethan's head snapped toward me from the graduate section. His mouth opened slightly. He didn't look angry. He looked stunned. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The applause built respectful at first, then stronger as the honors sash and medallion registered. I let it settle. Then I spoke. Good morning. My voice carried cleanly across the stadium. 4 years ago, I was told I wasn't worth the investment. The words didn't tremble. They didn't need to. In the front row, my mother's hand rose slowly to her mouth. My father didn't blink. I was told I was capable, but not exceptional. That I didn't command a room. That there was no clear return. 3,000 people were silent. So I stopped trying to be impressive. I paused and started trying to be disciplined. I spoke about early mornings, about coffee shop shifts before sunrise, about studying in borrowed spaces, about building infrastructure instead of chasing validation. I didn't mention my family. I didn't need to. This degree isn't proof that someone believed in me. I continued. It's proof that I learned to believe in myself without permission. The wind lifted the edge of my sash. Your worth is not a projection. It's not a forecast. It's not something another person calculates on your behalf. I scanned the audience once. Not lingering. Not accusing. You are not a low-yield asset. A few people laughed softly at the phrasing. But you do have to decide whether you'll build or wait to be chosen. When I finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous. People rose to their feet. Rows upon rows standing. 3,000 people applauding. I stepped back from the podium. As I descended the stairs, I didn't look for my parents. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking past me. They couldn't. And in that moment, I wasn't proving them wrong. I was proving myself complete. The reception tent was loud. Champagne glass. Faculty congratulations. Parents hugging graduates like they'd personally completed the coursework. I was shaking hands with the dean when I saw them moving toward me. Not walking. Pushing through the crowd. Dad reached me first. Adrienne. His voice sounded unfamiliar. Rougher. Why didn't you tell us I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server before answering? Did you ever ask? His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair, I repeated calmly. You told me I wasn't worth the investment. That was your framework. I worked within it. Mom stepped forward. Mascara faintly smudged. We didn't know. If we'd known about the scholarship, you did know. I said gently. You knew I was paying my own way. You just didn't think it would scale. Dad flinched at that. Ethan hovered a few steps behind them. Silent. I made a mistake. Dad said. I said things I shouldn't have. You said what you believed. Silence. The music from the speakers filled the gap. Mom reached toward my arm. I stepped back, not aggressively, just enough to reestablish space. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. That phase ended a long time ago. Then what are you, Dad asked. Independent. He looked at me like that word was heavier than it sounded. You cut us out, he said. You transferred without telling us. You let us sit there today like fools. I held his gaze. I didn't stage anything. I accepted an opportunity. He exhaled sharply. You could have called. So could you. That one landed. Mom's voice softened. Come home this summer. We'll talk. We'll fix this. I'm moving to New York in 2 weeks. Dad blinked. For what financial consulting firm? Entry level. He nodded slowly, recalculating in real time. You're just walking away, no? I said, I'm setting boundaries. There it was again. Boundaries. Not revenge. Not punishment. A line drawn without hostility. What do you want from us? Dad asked quietly. The question surprised me. I thought about it seriously. I don't want anything. I said, that's the point. Mom's eyes filled again. You're still our son, and you're still my parents. I replied evenly. That doesn't erase what happened. Ethan stepped forward then. Congratulations, he said. It wasn't forced. It wasn't sarcastic. It was simple. Thanks. He hesitated. We should talk. Just us. Maybe. Dad looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. If I call, he said. Will you answer? Depends why you're calling. He nodded once. Not satisfied, but understanding. I didn't hug them. They didn't demand it. We stood there in the middle of a celebration that wasn't about them anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't negotiating for approval. I was negotiating terms. And when I walked out of that tent toward Professor Hart waiting near the exit, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not vindication. Relief. I'm free. I told him. He gave a small nod. Yes, he said. You are. New York didn't wait for me to adjust. It moved fast. Loud. Impersonal. My apartment was a studio with one window facing a brick wall. The kitchen was barely wide enough to turn around in. The rent made my stomach tighten the first time I signed the lease, but the key in my hand felt earned. Morrison and Hale Financial Consulting wasn't glamorous at the entry level. Long hours. Endless spreadsheets. Senior partners who spoke in bullet points and expected the same from you. I loved it. Not because it was easy. Because it was measurable. Work in. Output out. No emotional guessing. 6 months in, I was promoted to analyst. A year later, associate track. My company offered to sponsor my MBA. The kid who ate ramen at midnight and slept 4 hours a night would have stared at this version of me in disbelief. Ethan called 3 days after graduation. Mom hasn't stopped crying, he said. Dad barely talks. I'm not responsible for their emotional processing. I replied. I know. He paused. I'm sorry. For what? For not noticing. For benefiting from it. For never asking how you were surviving. I leaned back in my desk chair. You didn't design the system. I said, you just operated inside it. That's not an excuse. No. I agreed. It's context. We started meeting for coffee when he visited New York. It was awkward at first. Two adult men trying to figure out what brotherhood looks like without comparison attached. He admitted something once. I thought you didn't care. He said, you were always so quiet about it. I stopped expecting anything. I replied, that's worse. Maybe it was. 6 months after graduation, Dad called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Adrienne. He said when I answered. His voice sounded older. I was wrong. No preamble. No corporate framing. Just that. I know. I said. Silence stretched. I don't know how to fix it. He continued. I can't rewrite 4 years. It's not my job to tell you how to repair something you broke. He exhaled. You're right. For the first time in my life. He wasn't defending himself. I'm willing to talk. I said eventually. But we're not pretending nothing happened. I wouldn't ask you to. That conversation wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. And that mattered more. 2 years after graduation, they visited my apartment. Mom cried when she saw how small it was. Dad didn't comment. He just looked around quietly. This is yours. He said. Yes. He nodded once. I underestimated you. That wasn't new. I replied. He almost smiled. We're not a perfect family now. We're not healed, but we're honest. And honesty is the first investment that's actually worth something. I used to think success would feel louder. Like fireworks, like vindication. It didn't. It felt quiet. Like standing in my apartment at night. City noise humming outside. Knowing every piece of furniture inside that room existed because I built toward it. For 18 years, I thought love was something you earned. That if I was impressive enough, disciplined enough, exceptional enough, my parents would finally look at me and say, we were wrong. But here's what I learned. You can't negotiate your worth with people who only understand value in returns. You can't outwork someone else's blind spot. And you can't spend your entire life chasing validation from people who never learned how to give it. 4 years of grinding taught me something my father never could. Worth isn't assigned. It's recognized. And if no one recognizes it, you still have it. The day I stopped trying to compete with my brother was the day I started competing with myself. The day I stopped waiting for permission was the day I became dangerous. Not to anyone else. To the limitations placed on me. Some of you listening right now are still sitting at that dinner table. Still being compared. Still being told you're reliable, but not exceptional. Still watching someone else receive the investment. Let me say this clearly. You are not a side project. You are not the backup plan. You are not the low-yield asset in someone else's portfolio. You are infrastructure. And infrastructure takes longer to build, but it holds more weight. Forgiveness, if it comes, isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about deciding the hurt doesn't get to dictate your future. I'm still working on that part. Some days it's easier. Some days it isn't. But I no longer build my life around whether someone else finally sees me. I build it because I see myself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to back you, type, I'm enough in the comments. Not for me. For you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. There are more stories about resilience, family dynamics, and rebuilding your life on your own terms waiting for you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because someone out there is still sitting in that living room being told they aren't worth the investment. And they need to know that sometimes the best return comes from betting on yourself. This story was created by the Boundaries and Bloodlines team for entertainment purposes only. Do not replicate situations or decisions depicted here in real life.